Hi there, I'm Mary Susie from Bead Me a Story, and today I'm going to show you how to set your own rose Monte beads. I'm not going to need a whole lot of tools for this. The first thing we're going to need is our bezel setter, and you can see inside here each of these has a size associated with them. So try and keep that in order in there. So when you choose one, you can choose a size that's approximately 1 to 1.5 millimeters larger than the stone that you plan to set. I also have a little plastic or rubber hammer here. You can use either one. And we're going to tap on the top of this bezel. This comes with a little tool that you can set these into, but I like to just use the little bezels on their own and tap the tops of these. Okay, so I'm going to get that out of our way. That's our hammer. And then the other thing I used with the flat back rhinestones, I actually don't tend to use my little sticky tool for picking up rhinestones. And this is that. This has just got a toothpick with a little microcrystalline wax on the tip. I don't tend to use that with the flat backs. I find them easier to pick up with tweezers. Okay, so I'm going to be working with 3 sizes today. The first size is the 12 SS. This is a 3 millimeter Monte, really tiny. And then I'm going to show you how to set a 16 SS. And you can see that's just a little bit bigger. Okay. And then finally we're going to do a 20 SS, which is a real good size. Now I'll just mention, when I choose the rhinestones that I want to work with, usually on the smaller, I'll go for the brighter and lighter colors. And when I'm working with the 20 SS, more of the rhinestone's going to show, so that's why I've got the purple velvet out here. I'll tend to use the darker shades in the 20 SS just because it'll show up a little bit better. So there's nothing wrong with using any color in any size, but just keep in mind that a lot of times these darker colors can really kind of get lost in the smaller Montes. So, you know, they're only going to really show up when they catch the light. They're not going to show up quite as well as it will in this 20 SS size. Okay, so I'm using 2 different types of rose Monte settings. I want to show you that this one in the 12 SS is a little bit darker. These are all brass settings, but this one is a little bit darker color. It's more of like a platinum or nickel color. And then the German settings that I have in the 16 SS and the 20 SS are very bright silver. Okay, so you want to keep that in mind as you're choosing both your jump rings to go with these, and if you're mixing different sizes of Montes together. Okay, so or navettes or any kind of sew-on setting, you want to keep that in mind so that it's not jarring if you see the different settings and the colors in them together. I just wanted to show you a couple pieces, and this is going to help illustrate the reason for setting your own. These are rose Montes, and I just want you to see how tiny these are in my tennis bracelet project that I do. And these are Chateau Montes. And I'll just show you that I pulled this particular kit because this uses 3 sizes. So you can kind of see the largest, the middle, and the smallest size that I have in the Chateau Montes. And you can see how much bigger, even though this size is the same, it's a 4 millimeter rhinestone, that this setting makes everything a whole lot smaller to work with, just as far as getting jump rings through. So just keep that in mind. And then I wanted to show you this one. This one uses a navette. Okay, and I've seen a lot of people try and buy the navettes and then buy Preciosa settings, and it's just simply not going to match all that well. I carry the glass navettes because they're actually a reasonable price that you can work with, whereas the Preciosa and the Swarovski can be really prohibitive in price. I am going to try and get some Preciosas in for the navettes where you can set them yourself, but keep in mind that this setting is more of a platinum nickel color. It's not the bright silver like we see in these German settings. So keep in mind to pay attention to the color of the setting that you're going to work with. Okay, so now let's move on to how to actually use these. So you might say to yourself, I'm never going to set my own Montees. I don't even know why you're showing this to me. Well, two reasons you might want to set your own Montees, and particularly if you are using them in chainmail. First of all, you can find a lot more colors in the flatbacks if you will set your own. It's very hard to get rose Montees in a lot of different colors. So this way you can just find the flatbacks and set your own. The second reason you might want to do this yourself is because we can go ahead and we can set our jump rings directly into the Monte, into the rose Monte, as we're setting the rhinestone. So I have pre-closed these jump rings, and I want to pre-close them so that they're very flat. If I were to leave these open, it would have a little bit of a slight imbalance to it. So you can see this jump ring with this little part that's sticking out. That's going to cause a little bit of imbalance if I'm setting it. So I like to pre-close these before I put the rhinestone in. And then all we're going to do here is simply use our tweezers to pick up the flat back. Sometimes they can pop out. These little 12 SS, sometimes I have to pick these up to get them. Oh, I got that one. Okay, and I'm just going to drop that in. Okay, you can see everything sitting really nicely. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick from my bezel setter. I'm going to pick something that is about 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters larger. So I know that this is a 3 millimeter rhinestone, and I picked out the 4.5 millimeter bezel to set this with. Okay, and the reason I want to do that is I want to make sure that the bezel is sitting outside all of these 4 prongs that are on the outside. So if I don't choose something larger, then it's going to be sticking out the outside, and when I tap on this, it's going to bend those prongs in an awkward manner. Okay, so you see I simply put the bezel on top, and I'm going to give this a couple taps, and we are set. Okay, so now that I have it set, now what I want to do is I'm going to pick out a 3 millimeter or 3.25 millimeter bezel, and I'm going to tap it one more time. This matches the size of the rhinestone, so that's just to make sure that everything's flat. So first I use one that's 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters larger, and then I use the one of actual size to tap it in and make sure everything is set perfectly. Okay, so you just saw me set a 12 SS or a 3 millimeter rhinestone. That looks great, and I'm going to push that off to the side here. The next one I'm going to show you is with the German clasp, with the German setting. Now, I had a heck of a time using the 16 SS. I did great with the 20, but I had problems with the 16 SS. And so with the smaller ones, I just want you to know, take these, and I use my fingers to push these prongs in just ever so slightly. Okay, you don't want to warp the rose Monte setting. You just want to push these in a little bit more so that when you go to tap on them with your bezel, they're a little bit more straight up instead of being tilted out. Okay, and I am going to use, for these, I forgot to mention with the 12 SS, you can only use jump rings that are 22 gauge or smaller. Okay, so that means you're going to be using steel, copper, argentium, or sterling silver with these. If you use sterling silver, I'd probably recommend treating your jump rings before you use them in here because they will tarnish over time, and that's going to be hard to deal with. So any of your rings, when you're using the other metals, you can certainly treat them for tarnish before you start using them with this, and it's going to help you in the long run. Now, this next size, I believe this is about a 21 gauge jump ring, and I just happen to have these. These were an odd die lot that I'm able to use because they ended up being a little extra skinny. So 21 gauge or smaller for the 16SS Rose Monte. And so 21 gauge, you may or may not be able to find in anodized aluminum. So then again, we're gonna have to go to steel, silver, or copper, okay? So that's a little bit trickier size. So let me bring in my pre-closed jump rings in this. And I'm just gonna pick these up and drop them in. And then I'll be all set for my rhinestone. I've got a peridot rhinestone sitting over here that I'm gonna drop in, okay? See, everything's sitting nice and flat. And I just wanna point out to you as we're doing this too, this is the largest 20SS, but see these little channels that are in the back? You wanna make sure that your jump ring is kind of sitting right in the channel. And that's why it's important what gauge you choose, because it needs to sit down in there where it doesn't warp the rhinestone, and doesn't make the rhinestone sit up too high so you can't get it closed. Okay, so I know this is my 4mm size. So I'm gonna go with the 5.5mm. I'm usually happier if I go 1.5 millimeters larger. Okay, so this is my 5.5. I can see as I put this down that this is surrounding all of the prongs on the outside of this Rose Monte. I'm gonna tap, that looks great. And then I am going to go ahead and use my 4mm bezel setter just to make sure that these are tapped down. And you notice I just tapped this lightly. You can feel the prongs drop as you hit this with your hammer. So you'll kind of feel it happening, and you don't want to distort the rhinestones or mar them in any way. So just be careful as you're doing this. And then I will mention, please make sure to watch my video on using resin to go around these. I really like these German settings. They have a little bit of a ball. You can see there's a little extra on here, and I imagine that's gonna help keep these from catching on your clothing. But you can also treat the Montees with a little bit of resin to make sure that there's no gap between that little setting and where you're going to, where it's gonna meet the rhinestone. Okay, now we are on our third and final one. And with this, I'm actually able to use a 20 gauge rhinestone. Okay, so 20 gauge or smaller to set into the 20SS. And then I've got my beautiful purple velvet here. This is just a gorgeous color. Hard to find. Okay, and so that was because I squeezed that in. That's why I had to push that in. I had squeezed these prongs in a little bit to make sure it set a little bit better. And that's okay, because the rhinestones still fit in there very nicely. And then I am going to grab my, let's see, so a 20 SS would be about a 4.6 to 4.8. So I'm going to grab, let me see if the 6.5mm. Yeah, that looks good. So I'm gonna use the 6.5mm on this. So that's just a little over 1 millimeter larger than the size I needed that's larger than the Monte. Okay, and then that is set beautifully. So on this one, I don't have exactly a 4.6, so I'm gonna use the 5. See how that does, or I can use the next size down. which is the 4.5. We'll see if this reaches out. You don't want to be hitting the rhinestone. You only want to be hitting just these little prongs that you tucked in. Okay, so that's all set. So that is all there is to setting rose montes. Really easy to do, and the time that you save of pushing these jump rings through each of these montes is just amazing. It's such a time saver. And I just wanted to show you, this is, I set this one with steel. This one was set by Preciosa, and the green one, the peridot, I set. Okay, so I just want to show you, this is a bright silver setting that Preciosa does. It's really beautiful, but you can see how much brighter that German setting is. So when you're choosing your jump rings to go with all these, you know, just keep all that in mind. You can see the steel goes pretty nicely. Because silver is so shiny, it is going to pick up whatever's around it, and you know, the color will shift just ever so slightly to accommodate you, but you don't want to put things together that are real jarring. So you can see I wouldn't necessarily use these two rhinestones in the same piece of work. I would want to use them separately. So this one was set by Preciosa. Beautiful settings by them, but also the German settings are much brighter and lighter. So keep that in mind, because I think with these German settings too, you probably wouldn't want to use them with the Navette settings or anything that's like the platinum or nickel color. You're going to want to kind of use these exclusively on their own, and I am exploring getting more of those and seeing what's available in the German settings. Okay, so I think that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoy setting your own rhinestone montes. We can do both chatones as well as the rose montes that I showed you here today, and this can enable you to choose more of your own colors and make your creations even a little bit more original for yourself. Okay, thanks so much for joining me.